Welcome to the Radiant Astrology Podcast, where we illuminate the wisdom of the cosmos for spiritual insight and soul-level healing. I'm your host, Christina Caudill. Thank you for joining me. Hello, this is Christina Caudill with Radiant Astrology, and in today's episode, I want to be talking about the myths of midlife seen through the lens of astrology. Now, with midlife, there's no definitive start and end, basically, but I'm looking at midlife and beyond, really. When we think of midlife in Jungian terms, it tends to be the late. I like to think of it really as starting around the Pluto square. Now, for different generations, that can be different ages. But generally, in the most recent generations, it's been about the late 30s, approaching 40. That's when we really feel like we're entering midlife, even as we live longer. But also, it's a chance to reflect on how we are guiding our own life, how we're being sort of the driver of our own destiny. And I thought it was important to explore it through some of these expectations we have in astrology. I have a lot of clients where I see people saying things online as in terms of, say, what is this transit of midlife supposed to be about? What's supposed to happen? What am I supposed to do? And we want to get away from language like that, because saying, things are supposed to happen a certain way, that's just not how life operates, really. And astrology needs to be seen in terms of not just predictive or even prescriptive, but just giving us a sense of the quality of the time that we're entering into. And this theme really first came to mind when I was recently being interviewed by Jen Zart for her podcast Within Orb, which should be hopefully coming out at some point soon. And she was saying she was getting a bit nervous about her upcoming Uranus opposition, which I can totally understand because I was kind of freaking out before I had my own. Because we think of Uranus, Uranus shatters things, it breaks things apart. It can make things exhilarating, but it can really amp up the anxiety. And she had asked me, what happens when you're already doing your Uranus, when you feel like very Uranian anyway? Do you just do the opposite? And I have seen that. I have seen people who are very always free and wanting to be single and not wanting any attachments, and then have the Uranus opposition or some kind of Uranus transit, then suddenly want to settle down or want to, have the home and the picket fence, and the children and the family and things like that. That's not always the case though, because I was thinking even more about it when I had mine. I had just even more Uranus. And also a lot of people that I've noticed, especially when it's Uranus, say in the 10th house or the 5th house or something like that, where there's some creativity involved or something where it's about expressing yourself, you can just get even more of that Uranus. All right. If Uranus is that brilliant idea, it can come into the realm of, say, you're an astrologer, your astrology is very much associated with Uranus, and you could just have that amped up even more. Maybe there's nothing that's going to get in the way of that for you during that time, during the period of couple of years, 2-3 years. And so it's not necessarily like there's going to be like a comet come and land in your living room, but, never say never with Uranus. However, it's essentially that energy of your natal Uranus being activated on like a spectrum, because it's an opposition. And when we look at the zodiac signs and even the houses, are the ones that are opposing each other are on opposite ends of a spectrum, and they're linked, but they are giving us more of, say, a broader view. You start to see maybe your blind spots in certain areas of life. You may get more passionate about what lights you up, what's thrilling or exhilarating. And maybe, nothing will stop you, nothing will get in your way. And as I said, I was really nervous about mine coming up because I have mine in Scorpio and in the 10th house and conjunct my moon. But luckily, I remember I was having pedicures with my friend Sam Reynolds before a conference, and he was telling me, don't worry about it because the Uranus opposition is really about finding your joy. Which is interesting because I wasn't expecting that kind of response from Sam Reynolds, who's very objective. And that sounded more of like a, sort of dressing up what could be a disturbing transit. But he was absolutely right. Again, especially because I already knew Uranus can be my friend. I mean, it's so close to my moon. I have to, have a relationship with Uranus. And the more I resist Uranus, the more that can lead to something sort of breaking apart unexpectedly or holding on to something that needs to be liberated, especially in Scorpio, where we tend to hold on to things, cling to things for too long until we sort of get the message. And that was an incredibly creative time for me, that period of a few years during my Uranus opposition, because it was also my Saturn opposition. I was having the two at the same time. That's when I did my most successful summit, the Astrology of Awakening, and that was during the COVID lockdown, which was interesting because that was when so many people for the first time, started using things like Zoom, which I had already been using for a number of years, for probably 4 or 5 years in my work every day, and with doing summits and conferences and things. So I was already positioned for that kind of space. And so getting back to just the journey of midlife in general, I think it's something that, it's very deep and profound, and it calls us to really allowing a turning inward to the soul and letting that guide us more so than getting all of this feedback from the parents, from society, from others, from social media, things like that. Like, yes, that can be helpful. Those things can all be tools, or they can be nice to help us, feel like we might be on the right path, but really to understand if we are on the right path, that really means turning inward. Because at midlife, that's when we realize we don't have forever in this life. And so I began exploring the work of Carl Jung, because Carl Jung, the depth psychologist, who really is about exploring the unconscious. And then there's all these Jungian psychologists that came from him. A lot of them are really focused on midlife because he was the first to really show that there is something different about midlife and in the developmental process of a human being. And James Hollis is one of my favorite Jungians because he writes so beautifully and he's so insightful. But the thing that I kept running up against is how James Hollis would always talk about midlife in terms of, it's that time when, when you're 20s, you get a job that your parents want you to have. And then in your 30s, you may be, climbing that corporate ladder or succeeding in some way and having children and things like that, being a father, being a mother. And then in your 40s, suddenly you want to be creative and you want, and the callings of the soul are louder. And I'm sure that's very true for maybe even the majority of people of a certain generation. It's not at all the path that I walked, or my husband. I think in our 20s, I remember it was at our Saturn returns is when we met. And he had established an art gallery, had been working in, I had a career in nonprofit, and, I was succeeding and accelerating, but I was so unhappy. And when I met him, I took a risk and we went into the visual arts together. And that was a risk, that was really about really believing in ourselves. We were entrepreneurs, we were creatives, And it was exciting, it was thrilling, things like that. But it was also it's extremely difficult running a business and being creative and having to do that stuff every single day. And there not ever being, an off button, basically. And so now that we're approaching midlife, we're actually right in midlife, depending on how you see, these ages, but we are in midlife. And, I feel like for both of us, it is a time that we are seeking a lot more stability. He sold the gallery. Now he closed the gallery, excuse me. And he is a curator now at a museum, which he loves because he can do his creative work, but he can get paid for it. He doesn't have to pay for the privilege of being in the arts. I still do my astrology, but I also work in communications. And so I don't have to fully depend on my clients for my survival, essentially. I can actually enjoy the time that I have with astrology. Now, one day I hope to, fully be back in astrology when things are, the environment is right for me. But I feel like it's always me really interfacing with what is real in my life right now, and where can I serve the best, and where can I be fully expressed. That has always been something that I have been really interested in. So struggle when I read a lot of these very insightful and beautiful teachings by Jungians, when they only talk about this one path, about finally you're in your 40s or 50s and you're finally creative for the first time, or you're finally taking risks for the first time. Well, what if you've been taking risks and at some point you want stability? I think the important thing for any creative person is that you're not making a complete trade-off of stability and creativity. I mean, for me and my husband, we're both creative types. There's just no way. I mean, that's the air we breathe. But how much risk in life are you going to take versus how much are you going to maybe find the right sort of structures to fit into that aren't completely foreign, that aren't like a, square peg in a round hole, for instance, but actually can support your intentions that you are living this life. I think it's, we're living in a time where we can be intentional about our careers, about our lives, about our creativity, about how we want to serve, about how we want to help people heal, if that is our path. So what's important to understand is the midlife journey, midlife and beyond, isn't the same for us all. And we can still get incredibly beautiful and valuable insight from, Jungians, psychologists, things like that, even if, there isn't just that one prescription in terms of how to live life. And also, generational opportunities can have made the difference. I mean, young people now have incredible opportunities with the internet that just didn't exist when I was in college, for instance. And also, a lot of the Pluto and Leo generation boomers that are really, they should be in their quote unquote golden years, or maybe coming up to whether they're past their second Saturn return. And that second Saturn return, if you'll see in a lot of astrological texts, it's like this is when someone's thinking about retirement. And that is I don't think I've had anybody that I can think of that had come to me anyway that are in that space. There may have been a few over the years, but generally the Pluto and Leo generation, when they are in their, they're most of them beyond the second Saturn return. Second Saturn return is approaching 60. And yes, generally that is when you're approaching, the retirement age is 64 in the United States, something like that. And you're thinking about, what do you want, this last chapter to be about? But I'm surprised, and some of these texts need to be updated, because I know so many that just have so much more life force and they have so much more to give, and maybe that's that Pluto in Leo generation that, Pluto was like a volcano that's ready to explode, and that's ready to, all the rumblings are ready to come to the surface. And I see so many that just really have so much life force in them that they do not want these years to pass them by without them creatively contributing to these years, to society, to the consciousness of humanity kind of thing. I mean, it's a very powerful energy. And who knows, when that Pluto will activate itself, that's lying dormant in your natal chart, right? And it's a beautiful thing. And when I have these, and, the vast majority of my clientele are women, but especially when it comes to this later time of life, and, they're not seeking my permission to be creative. They are seeking maybe some validation of what they already know, some encouragement, maybe some insider advice, which I'm happy to give to the extent that I'm able. But there are some that just really want to continue to be creative, especially with women who maybe never had the opportunity when they were in their 30s or 40s or whatever, the workforce, and having good paying jobs and being in positions of power. I mean, luckily we continue to make progress, but just think, even 20 years ago, a lot of what we see now in the world was unheard of. So I can see how the Pluto and Leo generation, maybe they want to make up for the lost time where they, feel like they're suddenly able to express themselves in a way that can be seen and heard. I also am seeing a lot from the Pluto and Virgo generation women who come to me for guidance at the second Saturn return. And again, most of them, at least who come to me, not that there's anything wrong with retiring and not working, right? Because we're more than just what we do for work. If we live any kind of spiritual life, we can realize that we are valuable beyond just what we do or the paycheck we earn or even what we contribute to society. But I feel like there are so many in this generation, when we think about that Pluto impulse, so many want to help the healing of humanity. They want to serve humanity in the best way they can. And perhaps even in times like these, that is what is finally really waking up for many of these people. And as they followed, the Pluto and Leo generation, it's like when you think of the Leo versus the Virgo archetype, Leo can take up a lot of space and can take up a lot of the light, right? Because so many have this star quality. And Virgo was kind of, the shadow side of that, being humble. It's not about me. It's about how I can serve. And so many of them have been sort of either quietly acting in the background, trying to get the attention, but yet now is the time, again, in midlife and beyond, where we finally say that Pluto wants to erupt, and in what way is it going to erupt? And I think it's beautiful how the Virgo generation is here to further what they were born into. And many of them were born into this time of women's liberation, where women were, for the first time in droves and throughout the world, were asserting their right to be human, right? And not just in service to, the patriarchy. They were born during that time, and now something is erupting within them. And whether it is rights for women, whether it is offering their healing ability, when we think of the 60s and people thought, oh, everything was so woo-woo back then, and, all this alternative medicine. Well, alternative medicine now has been accepted to such a great degree that it's almost like what's alternative might even be more the allopathic medicine. I don't know. But there's such an opening for healing. People understand that throughout life, we need healers to help us in our healing journey. And a lot of those I see are coming from the Pluto and Virgo generation. Now, these are all just, major, I'm talking about groups of people, I'm talking about movements of generation, movements of planets. So there's nothing that you are supposed to do during a certain transit, right? It can manifest in a myriad of different ways. I think that is really the ultimate, most important thing to understand. And that at midlife, I think the thread that is most important to understand about midlife, it's an opportunity to live the unlived life of the soul. We can't do everything that, we potentially could do in one life, right? In order to advance in life, we have to focus, we have to say no to things. But there can come a time where these sort of nudges of what needs to be expressed in you really need to come alive. And that really is the beauty of midlife and beyond. And it reminds me of that quote, most people die with their music still locked up inside of them, right? Most people at one time would die with their music still locked up inside of them. I think what's beautiful about these times, right? We're moving more and more into Aquarian times, that potentially everyone can have an opportunity to express what is inside of them. Whether it's music, whether it's, some idea that wakes you up in the middle of the night that is significant for others to know and others to hear. That is what is being called forth now, right? Is these Aquarian times where it's about the brilliant idea whose time has come. And we each have that within us. And so it's a matter of sharing it and accessing it and letting it live through us. All right, my friends. Well, that's it for today. Be sure to sign up for my free newsletter at radiantastrology.com. And you can book a reading for more insight on your life journey with the insight of evolutionary astrology and archetypal astrology. Please rate this podcast and share it with your friends who love astrology. I would love to share more of what I know of life and astrology with anyone who loves astrology. So I thank you so much for listening, and bye for now.